Hello. Welcome. We got people going to be filtering in. Natasha, how's your day going?
Do you know what? My day's been pretty chill. I've been okay.
Great.
Like loving
Amazing.
it, enjoying the sun. Like I cleared space for this, let me tell you.
Really? Oh my gosh, you need to send some of your chill energy my way. I need it.
Oh, yeah, I've got like the lavender sprays. I have the calm music going. I just get into the headspace. How about you though? But knowing you.
Well, as you know from the conversation we were just having in the waiting room, I am in calibration week here at Leapsome. And it's my first time calibrating at Leapsome, and it's something that I'm wildly passionate about.
Yeah.
Actually, in the chat, if you guys are interested, I'd love to hear from everyone that has joined or is joining. Would you like to hear more about how we calibrate performance at Leapsome? It's definitely tied to compensation, so it's something that might be interesting to y'all
Yeah,
listening in
I
today.
think like that.
And you were just saying to me that you are yet to go through a full cycle at Ravio, but you've been, yeah, I don't know, you have, I mean, we'll get stuck into it in the
We
introduction.
really will. But I'm seeing all the yeses coming in. Like I think you've really kind of like you sparked something there, Jess. And I'm like, okay, because we've got a lot to speak about anyway.
I know, we can't. Got to keep it focused. Got to keep it focused. Okay, well, everyone is coming and joining us too. I'm very excited to chat to you today. I'm
Yeah.
so glad, Natasha, that you are feeling chill. It's good to feel chill when we're talking about comp. I feel like
Oh,
um, it's a big topic. It's a big topic at the moment. So please, everyone, continue using the chat for reactions and comments throughout. Natasha and I are going to be having a very long conversation together for about an hour today. But it's always really nice to have other people chiming in. I love kind of bringing in what's happening in the chat into our conversation.
yeah.
And use the Q&A box for questions, please. I have a very bad habit of kind of losing the questions if they go into the chat. So if you pop in the Q&A box, I'll make sure we get to them towards the end. If you have to drop off early or you would like to send this to somebody, just so you know, the recording goes to all registrants after the session. So doesn't matter if you have to drop off a little early from today, you'll still get a full recording of the entire thing. And lately I've been also posting them on my LinkedIn as well. So keep an eye there too. Great. We're going to run two quick polls today. One of them is going to start now, which is just to get a feel for what's going on in your company. Does your company negotiate salaries with candidates? Is it something that you do pretty much on every single offer? Sometimes you have bands, but you kind of flex when pressure hits, or no, everything's very, very fixed, very, very published. There is no negotiation. I'd love to hear where everyone else is at. Because for many companies, I feel like negotiation feels like something that's really fair. You're kind of doing something that, if somebody asks, you're flex, everyone has the same opportunity. I've definitely heard this from founders before, right? Founders are like, it's fair then, because everyone has the same opportunity to kind of like fight for their rights. I have a slightly different opinion on that. I know you as well do, Natasha. But I am going to talk a little bit about what we do here at Leapsome. And of course, our good friends at Ravio have both supported us in what we do by providing incredible market data. But also, I know Natasha is very experienced. You have a very, very interesting background in that you've worked with my dear friends at Unleashed. And I know the world of consulting. I was COO at Talentful for several years, and it is hard. It's really hard. You are
It's
measured
hard.
so much on output and
Yeah.
outcomes. You
Yes.
have created and launched so much work for so many companies on the inside under discrete pressure. And I'm really interested to hear how that experience all culminates and translates into what you're doing now at Ravio later on today as well. But I'd love an
Yeah.
introduction. Introduce yourself. Sorry, I feel like I'm gassing you up, but gas yourself up. Gas
Okay.
yourself up.
So for those people who don't know me, because there's a lot of people on this call today, I believe. So, probably the first time people have met me. I'm Tasha Delisle-Barrow, or Tasha DB, as people call me. And I'm currently the Chief People Officer at Ravio. Now, as Jess was saying, I've spent my career really just helping companies go through transition and change, whether they're scaling up, expanding into new markets, whatever they're doing, mergers, whatever a company is doing, I'm usually brought in at that inflection point, basically. And I have a really strong focus on things like performance, reward, and organizational design. And I am a strong believer that compensation fits into org design. It's no longer a side piece. It actually fits into the center of everything we do in our strategy. And I suppose really at Ravio now, I get to really combine that practitioner experience that I've developed over the years. And I've seen a lot, yes. And now I also I'm developing a broader view of what's happening in the compensation market. So the plan today is to bring in a bit of both perspectives.
Amazing. And Ravio, your superpower is comp. For at least the last 5 or 6 years of me working in this space, I've known Ravio to be one of the front runners in the whole new brave world of compensation benchmarking and analysis. And you and I, when we were talking in our prep call about this, is like, I remember back in the day when it was like a different company starting with R that we had to get our comp benchmarking from. And it was like a big old spreadsheet that we'd have to download and pay like $10,000 for. It was once a year. It was super lagging. And then you'd have to do all of your own building on top of that. But times have changed massively. And that's changed how we think about everything to comp. As you've mentioned, now we have like so much more freedom.
Yes.
How has things changed since, I mean, we're going a little bit off topic here, but I think it's helpful. How has things changed for you over the last, like maybe like, 7 or 8 years between how we used to think about comp and how we think about it now, thanks to tools like Ravio and Leapsome, where we're able to kind of see bands in the same place as performance reviews, when people's levels are changing after cycles, we can submit these real-time calibrated compensation assessments. Like there's so many new things out in the market now. How's things changed for you?
So interesting, a lot to unpack, and I'm going to try very hard not to put my not to trauma dump here as well. Because basically, when you said spreadsheets there, I was thinking about like these massive big spreadsheets that I used to work from. And I've worked with companies where you've got like 20 odd countries, let's say, and you've got spreadsheets for each of those. And you can imagine that you sit there and they've got lots of little formulas in them. And if you put something in the wrong place, God help you, because you'd be breaking it somewhere else. And so even now, when I think about that, I think a little piece of me just dies. And so I'm really glad that the market has caught up with what we've needed internally. And like you said, they were super laggy, they were really expensive, and they were just really hard to understand or even explain to anyone. So so now we have tools like Ravio, like you say, and what's changed massively is our access to real-time data, like always on market data. So not just that annual snapshot that we used to get, that one-time thing, but where companies can check its market position between those formal cycles, you know? And I think that technical unlock that we all needed has meant that we can talk about compensation differently. We're no longer talking about formulas, because I swear we used to you needed a math degree sometimes, didn't you? But now what we're doing is talking about compensation in a much broader way, it really is. And I think also as well that having that access to real-time data and always on market data has meant that the way we see negotiation really should change along that as well, because in my experience, negotiation used to be sort of like a rational response to what was just genuinely bad information.
Absolutely. It's so funny. Like I think about the spreadsheet thing, right? It's like I have spent the last couple of years working with HRIS systems and just technology was just in a different place, right? So like you mentioned, obviously we're using these big old corporate data sets, lagging, challenging, and then we're building on HRIS systems that are like a little bit more, I guess, like rigid than we can be now. And I have a similar story where I've built like a full algorithmic, almost like meritocratic bonus distribution spreadsheet, and then all it takes is one formula to shift out of one cell in the wrong way, and all of a sudden you're paying 400 people the wrong bonus. And you have to be this like kind of goblin of the spreadsheet, whereas like no one's allowed to touch column X. And if you do, I swear, I'm like, I don't want to be that lady. And I say this as a spreadsheet girly. So I'm very excited to talk a little bit more about how it's like as you've rightly said, it's completely kind of changed. We've gone from having to be, what are we capable of reliably producing from compensation and then having these kind of necessary outcomes like negotiation to fill the gaps in, to almost going back and saying like, let's just remove all of this trauma, as you said, and think more creatively. Like, okay, we're almost mini economists now. How do we use all of these amazing kind of flexible plastic tools available to us, Leapsome, Ravio, and be really creative about how we can use compensation to drive performance, to drive engagement, to understand our place in the market, so much, and build our orgs.
Yeah. And I think
Go
you
ahead.
just touched something really important there, actually, when you were saying, when we talk about performance, because one of the things that I always come back to is when we talk about a performance, we know people can perform really, really well when we make expectations really clear. Now, if you were to take that mindset into the way in which we apply compensation, the same route should really apply. If you're really transparent about what you want to be able to achieve, be transparent about what it says about your culture and about the way that decisions are made, that you need to be having those similar style of conversations there. And so then as a result of that, you have better conversations, right?
Yeah.
Managers have better conversations, I suppose, really, when it comes to these things. And organizations just make better decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I actually, you know what this makes me think of? A couple of years ago, I wrote these 3-part blog series called Approaching Compensation More Like Pricing. I'll share them in the chat and we'll send them out after this as well. Where I make the argument, very similar to what you've just shared there, is that a company has like a unique position in the marketplace. You want to attract this very specific type of person, or like kind of an ideal customer, using my people obsessive product methodology. And that means that, you know, if you're trying to attract people that are very, very high leverage, high skill, so like PhD scientists, versus if you're trying to attract kind of like maybe quite low leverage, low skill, but like, you know, high potential. So for example, a lot of like marketing graduates and young creatives, your compensation philosophy and the way you approach comp is going to be extremely, extremely different. And I kind of make this argument there that like you should kind of think about your ideal customer profile, the capital you have to move through the market with, and also the market movements in order to think about compensation. Actually, let me just grab the blog. I'll share it with everyone here. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, because this is what I really liked about the compensation philosophy that you have as well. And when I was reading through that, because yes, you're right. You're trying to optimize for so many different things, right? Like you said, there's the highly skilled, highly sought after candidate versus, you know, the candidate where there may be, you know, it might be a lot easier to hire at that level. And so I think you pulled out some really great points. And I think when I was reading the Leapsome compensation philosophy as well, that for me just really stood out in terms of understanding what you're driving through this and what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah. So what we've done at Leapsome, like, I'm super glad you brought this up. But first of all, I'm just very proud of my team and I love what they've built. But I think it's an interesting use case to talk about is we have just published our fully transparent compensation philosophy, which I've just linked into the chat here today, and also built, vibe coded, and shipped our compensation calculator, which you can go on and see all of our publicly transparent bands of compensation as well, which is really great. So I'll give a quick little screen share of this. Why not? There we go. So everyone should be able to see that now. So you can go in, anyone in the entire world can have a little look at what would I get paid if I was working at Leapsome in the sales team in Berlin, for example. And then you can also ask why. Why is it the salary that you're paying? And you can see here the benchmarks we use, Ravio, beautiful name there. And understand our thought process. But the topic of today's conversation is around negotiation. And one of the things we have done is we have removed negotiation from our process. So what we do at the beginning of our interview process is we speak to each candidate and we ask them, we proactively, several times actually, share our compensation philosophy and say, here is our compensation philosophy. Feel free to read it on application and share us what your expectations are. Then in the interview with our recruitment partner, we ask them again, have you read our compensation philosophy? Do you understand our compensation philosophy? Do you have any questions about our compensation philosophy? And then ask them again for their expectations. At which point we make it clear to them that if we proceed through to offer, we will not negotiate. We'll give you a one fixed salary. That salary will be based on other members of the team at the appropriate level that have demonstrated the same skills, and our band and their experience compared to what we saw in the market. If we, for any reason, believe there's like some kind of conflict or issue, we'll obviously get in touch with the candidate. We may even internally change our salaries if we see things happening in the market that may require us to change our banding or relook at those real-time data points. And then when an offer is received, we do not negotiate. And the reason for that is because we give all of our transparency at the very beginning. We have all of our discussions at the very start. And then once we've reached an agreement that we can both pay our team fairly and this person fairly according to the skills that they have, we will proceed to offer on that basis rather than bias load negotiation at the end of the process, which I think is something that is a little uncomfortable for some of our candidates, right? I'm interested in maybe like from your experience, like there's parts of this that I see you nodding your head out. Is there any parts that you feel like you want to shake your head out? You're like, how would you feel if you're a candidate and this is the process you're in?
I think, you know what, I think what you've spoken about is just so indicative of where we want to be internally, which we would all love to be in that position. And I think that's why so many people are here today, right? Like, how do we get there and how do we do this? And in my experience, definitely, I think, you know, my experience has always been that you get to the final part of the salary of the interview process, and then you get into the salary negotiation. And then what happens is maybe the candidate's coming in with a different range to a salary to what was actually advertised or what was, you know, presented. And then all of a sudden you're bringing in the big guns, like a CEO, a founder, to have that conversation to close the candidate. And that happens more than you would expect. And I've seen that so many times. And I think also as well, what that shows me is that somewhere along the line or somewhere in the system, we have compensation philosophies. We know what compensation should look like, but we haven't aligned with our managers on it. We haven't trained our managers on it. We haven't spoken, we haven't introduced it into the process enough. And yes, that is very, very true in terms of, you know, you go all the way through. And I think, you know, it's not unreasonable to expect companies, for example, who have spent time hiring, they don't want to lose this great candidate. And so the default becomes negotiation as a result of that. But what you've shown is that transparency upfront is you know, is kind of the silver bullet, so to speak.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because there's something I think a little parental that we have had a habit of doing in people ops maybe, which is you and I, and pretty much I'm sure everyone in this call almost has exposure therapy on comp, right? Like I remember my first year working in people ops, I'm sure there were multiple moments where I was like, wait, what? People get paid this? Oh my goodness. But then after a certain point, it becomes fuzzy. You see enough that it's not hard to metabolize that information anymore, right? Because you're so used to understanding, right? It's a market force. There are differences in how we're going to approach talent. There's like a capital allocation question here. But that kind of same level of exposure therapy is often kind of withheld from managers, sometimes until it's almost too late. Where I've worked with managers that until like maybe they're at the VP level, never had the chance to understand and see like the full compensation of their team. Do you feel like that kind of, is there a relationship in your mind between that kind of parentalism and why companies have kind of defaulted to negotiating salaries? Or like, why do you think we do it?
Oh, so why do we negotiate salaries? So I'll start there.
Yeah.
And then I can sort of, I guess, show why it's almost showing up in what's showing up in practice. I think, you know, like when we look at why companies do negotiate salaries, it's literally because, you know, why does it happen at all? Well, like you've just mentioned, it helps us win talent. It keeps us really competitive in a tight market, maybe. For example, it gives us flexibility. And these aren't unreasonable, you know, but I think sometimes they're not really tested against what negotiation is quietly costing elsewhere in the business. So we look at it from the lens of hiring, but we forget that there's this kind of like domino cascading effect that's going to show up elsewhere. Now, we know that market rates shift constantly. They move with demand, skills shortages, economic factors, what competitors are paying. But then inside a company, comp doesn't move on its own like that. It only really updates when someone actively forces that update. So that update could be the compensation review, a benchmarking exercise, or an individual just asking for more. And so what I find is that it really happens because, negotiation can happen because companies are just really, there's hiring pressure and urgency. And when we looked into the data of this in Ravio, we found that something like 85% of companies say that they make market adjustments as part of a formal compensation review process, which is reassuring in itself. But then you have to look at the cadence of that, because that might only be happening once or twice a year. So between these cycles, the gaps are just opening up, they're getting wider because the market is moving and nothing is correcting for it in the meantime. Then elsewhere in the system, you've got this compensation philosophy, which says we only make decisions based on this, 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 and this.
Yeah.
But obviously the market then forces things because, like you said, budget constraints or movements in the market mean that urgency becomes key. And one thing we haven't done as well is really skilled managers up to have those conversations, to develop this skill of how to handle a negotiation in practice. So companies don't want to lose a candidate they've invested time in, so they move on salary. But like I said, if that newer salary isn't checked against the system or against even existing employees doing equal work, then a pay equity issue opens up that wasn't there the day before. You just introduced this new pay challenge. So I guess, I don't know, maybe I waffled around the question, but yeah.
No, it's great. No, you'll see, I'm taking notes while you're writing, because I'm like, oh, okay, things I want to talk about. Yeah, I think what's interesting to me is I remember that two like concrete analyses I've done in my career that I think are relevant to this is like, the first one I did in my previous company, and actually the one before that, I used to do this employee-based audit, which is something I gratefully stole with my friend, Professor Pete Fader at Wharton, who does a customer-based audit, great book, where I would take all the data from our HRIS and all the data from our ATS and kind of connect it and try to do a big analysis. Something that now is so crazy easy with AI, but at the time would take me and an analyst in my team 3 weeks to do. And what I looked for was like connections between ATS and I feel like so often what happens in recruitment, as you've just mentioned, like things are frothy in recruitment. You have money, you have demand. They dry up quite a lot later on down the process because there's all these like reasons that all of a sudden, like, it's not an urgent thing. It's an unknown. This person's still in the team. We don't know if they're going to leave. We know the person won't sign. So there's like all these like kind of incentives pushing and pulling us in funny directions. Which is one of the reasons why I love having like an all-in-one ATS and HRIS now. It's so much easier to do these kinds of things. But what I found was the number one reason for exit for people that had their salaries negotiated below what they wanted to have when they joined. So say I wanted $50,000 a year and I got $47,000. Yes, the company saved $3,000 annually. But the number one reason for exit for all of those people was compensation. They never got over the gap. If you've been negotiated under your ideal offer, you never get over the gap. It doesn't matter if people had a 10, 20% pay rise very soon after. They always felt like they were just a little bit being gypped, basically. And the other interesting thing that I think is worth flagging is at a company, a very, very long time ago, we used to do, to your point, our salary reviews annually on the date of their anniversary. So we didn't do the whole company at once. We did every individual whenever it came up. And I did an analysis on all the historical pay changes. And I found that if you had an anniversary falling in Q4, your salary change was 20% lower than if you had a salary change in Q1, because everyone just got their brand new budgets and all of a sudden had cash to burn. But in Q4, we were a little nervous about the end of the year. We needed to meet our targets. We had this big Q4 coming up. So super interesting how there's all of these external factors. When you start layering negotiation into the mix and individualistic one-to-one discussions, all of a sudden we start to see big gaps emerge, like you just mentioned.
Yes, so true. And in actual fact, to that point, that specific point, Ravio actually conducted some research. We actually had our own data around this. So we did some research on P3 software engineers across Europe. And what it showed was that for most of the year, new hires and existing employees were broadly at, say, pay parity. I think it was something like 0.5% higher across the data set. But then when we looked at it in the last 2 years, we saw a consistent spike in February. So in February 2025, there were new higher salaries jumped 14% above existing employees. And in February 2026, for those P3 software engineers, it rose to 12%. Now, that's a pattern that we don't have a defined reason for, but we can probably assume that budgets have got something to do with it, right? That urgency of pushing through. So then what happens is that, what are you rewarding with negotiation? Because actually what you're doing is you're rewarding the person that asks at the right time. So whether it was a Q4 or a Q1 or wherever, and I think that's so true what you just said. And there is actually research, and I'll have to find the blog. I'll find
find it, send it, someone will find it. Absolutely.
I'll ask one of the team to put that in for us.
Yeah, precisely. Okay, I love this. So you and I have talked a little about why do we think we do this? What doesn't work about it? There are definitely things in my experience. So this is the third company now that I've implemented a no negotiation rule. Mm-hmm. And there are definitely things that have to exist to make it possible, right?
Yes.
I don't think if anyone's out there listening and saying I want to do this, I don't think it's easy just to go away and say we don't negotiate with candidates anymore.
No.
I'd love to get a bit of a feel from you. What is needed for us to be able to say, let's set the standard, we don't negotiate anymore, and feel like we can really stand behind that as a team, from your experience at Ravio, and also just generally?
No. And I think that's a really good point, because like you said, we can't just say, no, we're not going to do this anymore, and then not figure out actually what do we lose as a result of that, or what should we be doing instead? What do we need? So I think, let's paint a picture. What do these things look like in practice? Because, we can nod along and say, you need to have a philosophy, and that philosophy can be very abstract, and it can be very sort of nice to but when you think about it, if you've got a manager who's in mid-conversation with someone who's just mentioned that they've got a competing offer 15% higher than yours, and you've got no band to point to, you've got no documented philosophy, managers haven't practiced for that exact moment.
Yeah.
They either improvise, or they escalate to HR, or they push to get a yes. Okay. Mm-hmm. And that's what happens. So there are what I would call 4 or 5 things that you probably need in place. And I'm going to start with the compensation philosophy, because I think this is the one that people skip, but I want to show what a good compensation philosophy can feel like. So it's not abstract. A good compensation philosophy that is written down will tell you what the market position is that we're choosing, so where we place ourselves within the market. It will say what we're optimizing for, and it will probably say what are the guiding principles in which you make those decisions. Every philosophy, as I was mentioning at the beginning, really does optimize for something. So for example, if you do optimize, if you have a philosophy which states, okay, we have fixed bands, the chances are you're optimizing for internal consistency. Mm-hmm. If you have wide bands, then you're looking at flexibility. If you have narrow bands, you want equity. And median pay talks about financial sustainability. Market leading pay, that's your candidate attraction piece, right? Mm-hmm. So it's really important that your compensation philosophy is optimizing for something. It's not just a set of, we don't do this, we don't do that, we believe. Let's get really, really business focused on it. The second thing then is salary bands that are actually robust. And those salary bands have to have a clear minimum, a midpoint, and a maximum for each level. So what you want to be able to do is allow for experience, performance, I guess, or progression, but at the same time, they're not so wide that 2 people in the same band doing the same job have about 10 to 20% pay gap between, with no defensible reason. So that's the second thing. The third thing that I would probably say is job architecture. That's really consistent. And that is, in other words, leveling. Yeah. So if you've got a senior engineer in one team who is recognized at the same level as another senior engineer in another team, and comparisons across the business, you want those to be on a similar level, and a similar pay level, I should say, so that you're comparing apples to apples rather than, so job architecture leveling. The
Mhm.
fourth is market positioning, because that's the real-time visited, real cadence, not just once a year when the comp review happens, but actual real-time data. And that's what the February spike was showing in that example I gave you earlier from the data, I think. And
Mhm.
what we're seeing when we do all these different adjustments at different times of the
Yeah.
year. We've also done those as well. And then the fifth one, and I am going to say this with my entire chest, because it goes back to what you were saying before and what we've kind of touched upon. The thing that I am going to underline really, really strongly for everybody, so I hope everybody hears this, is you need to be able to turn your documentation, your banding, your leveling into something actionable. And there's two words, and it's manager training. Those are the two things you need to know. Manager capability, not in the abstract, but an actual kind of program, maybe even as part of your leadership development program or your manager development program, how to have that exact compensation offer conversation, how to explain a pay decision, without hiding behind, oh, this is what the band says. How to run a progression conversation, for example, and how to hold the line on sort of those ad hoc exceptions. And I think that's really important. So, and I think that's a rehearsed skill. It's a practicable skill,
Yep.
not just a policy, and it's not just words written down. It's actually put
Yep.
into practice. And just a quiet mention, there should be something that says when we do flex versus when we don't flex.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just having a little giggle at Susan's comment, which makes me laugh. But okay,
Yeah.
I agree with you on so much there. I think from my perspective, the things that have really, really helped me is like so much of what you've just covered off, right? Is like go and actually work with your leadership team. I think we've had a couple questions in here in the conversation as well about like how did I get my leadership team on board with this? The blog I shared earlier today where I talk about compensation being like pricing was a big part for me. I think sometimes as a HR leader, I've had so many mentoring sessions with other HR folks who have asked me like, how do I become more commercial? How do I kind of get in that commercial hot seat, right? Where I'm able to kind of have conversations with the board, be part of the executive team in like a much more strategic way. Honestly, in my opinion, compensation is the door to do that. Compensation gives you the same language as your commercial team in terms of how you talk about capital allocation. It gives you an immediate insight into how you're going to talk about org design in the same language as your finance team, which includes workforce planning, and includes like things like return on investment, ROI, blah, 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 blah. There's a lot of like, the door gets big and like juicy when you finally really get your head around compensation. So the blog I wrote a couple of years ago, approaching comp a bit more like pricing, I think really goes into detail about like how to think about your philosophy from a market perspective, which means backing it with market data, understanding the levels in your team, all of the kind of like fundamentals in the back end. But really, I think the number one thing for me is like really being very clear on your philosophy and getting the leadership team to buy into it.
Yeah.
Because once you've got that leadership team to understand why the rules you've jotted down are so important for capital allocation, for return on investment, for organizational design, all of a sudden people are comfortable saying like, if that's what we need to do, let's do it. We get it. We're ready to train our team. We're going to stand behind these numbers. We understand why this is very important. It's not just another HR policy. This is like a commercial part of our investment strategy or whatever it may be, that we really need to think about from the top, which I think is really, it's a big benefit. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And I get that as well. And I think that, when people teams, HR teams, talent teams, when we're speaking that business language, we can say so much and be heard in those rooms. And you're so right. Like, when you're understanding things like, and compensation is such a great way to anchor on this, that when you understand what is the problem we're solving for, what is it that we want to be able to do really, really well with this? And why does this matter to the business? What will this impact if we don't do this for the business? How will it impact our growth, our performance, our finances? Then you've got something that you can really anchor on. I think that is so true and so right. And if anybody here knows Juby, the gorgeous Juby, hands up to her, go listen to her. Honestly, go listen to her, because the thing that she will always say is, what is on your CEO's mind? What is on your CFO's mind? Get into that mindset, and then you turn your compensation problem into a solution, and that becomes sort of strategy. So 100%, I absolutely agree with everything you've said there. I don't disagree.
Wicked. Well, I'd love to think a little bit more, I guess, from the candidate perspective or like the employee perspective, there's a lot of questions here, by the way, which I'm excited to get stuck into. I think David, Joe, Ren, there's a few people that have already talked about like internal discussions. So look, we've built the thing, we've settled on our philosophy, we've decided no negotiation, everyone's behind it, we have the fundamentals that we need in place, and now we're launching it. But for me, I think the next biggest thing is trust, right? Our team needs to trust that that's actually going to happen. And I think so many of the questions are kind of feeding into this. For me, one of the ways that I've always been able to be successful in having my team genuinely believe in that is I immediately go away and proactively change our team's compensation based on the philosophy. So at Leapsome, when we did our very first, we wrote our philosophy, we went and did our big audit. Everyone in our team, how did they fall in the current bands? It didn't even matter if you're on a performance improvement plan. We raised your salary to market rates and had a conversation with you where we said, we understand that you're currently on a performance improvement plan. This is not a performance related pay change. This is a pay change because A, we believe you're going to pass it. That's the most ethical way to approach these things. And two, if we were to replace you, we would be replacing them on this exact salary. So we're going to be honest with you and you need to be honest with us, and we're going to respect you. And we raised our team salaries $200,000 annually through that process, which is, I think, maybe another question that Liam's asked is like, that's one of the big things it's hard to convince an exec team on. It is hard.
I was going to ask you, how did you get alignment on that? How did you get buy-in on that? You've mentioned you did it third time now, I think you said you've done it.
I've done about 6 of these in my life, but this is the third time I've done no negotiation.
Like, talk through, because I'm sure people are really interested in how you got there.
Yes, I think again, it really goes back down to like approaching this from capital allocation and commerciality, right? Is like, if you like, I think I don't have a problem with the word human resources. I feel like it's people say it's like you're not human enough. I'm like, well, on the P&L we kind of are, right? And I'm comfortable with that. Like I know what I am to Jenny and to Kaiten, our founders. I am a person that they truly enjoy spending time with. But to our P&L, to Leapsome, the Inc. or GmbH, I am a resource, right? And I understand that. So for me, if I like kind of strip away the kind of need to when I really focus on what we're trying to do as HR practitioners, which is to optimize our capital allocation in our people in a way that is like human and kind and all of the things that are very important to us. But really we're there. Our board is asking us to optimize capital allocation in our team, right? When I think about that, one of the first things that's going to come up is, are we getting the best talent in the market in the ICPs we're looking for? That's market driven. And second, are we retaining people so that they're able to have long-term return on investment for the cost that we put into them?
Yes.
So if you're doing an analysis on ARR per head and profit per head at your growth rate, whatever it is that your main metric is commercially, and you're able to understand how long it takes for someone to pay themselves back, which can sometimes be 2 years. After promotion, they usually set themselves back 3 or 4 months again, right? When you're thinking about all those things, what you end up is a very clear story that like, if we're hiring people and if we're retaining people through promotions, we want to be doing it for a pretty long time. And if we know there's a trend, and I've just mentioned before an analysis that the number one reason for exit for negotiating under expectations is going to be comp, then it is not in our best interests to negotiate on $5,000 to $7,000. And it is not in our best interest to piss our teams off, excuse me, when we launch our comp philosophy. It is in our best interest to fill that $200,000 gap or whatever it may be, and make sure that we're walking the walk, because we're going to have to replace this team in 6 months' time if we do not.
Yeah. And look at the cost of replacement, thank you very much, which will pretty much outstrip the cost of what you've just done. So so absolutely. The return on investment is higher and greater when you reward your current staff and your higher performance versus replacing. I stand on that too. And I think it's a great exercise and something that we as teams probably don't think enough about. And I think when you were just mentioning there about resources and sort of what you're showing is value and what you're showing is impact as well, but using compensation as the lens to do that through.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that, Jasmine.
Amazing. What's on the next poll then? Okay, like we've got a couple of other questions here about equity gaps. Does your team try to catch these? At Leapsome, we've just done our first audit. We're going to be doing these audits every quarter at the moment. Are you doing something? Are you looking at things if people raise it? Are you going out in the market and saying like there's a gap here? Are you doing an annual review? Is this kind of a spreadsheet analysis you're doing whenever it feels like you should? Or are you constantly having to think about it? Is it live? I think these kinds of like fundamentals infrastructurally are what ultimately builds the trust in your team. And I think that one of the questions we have here as well is like, what happens when someone gets a counter offer? What happens if they get an offer from another company? This is actually the same rule that I set internally is if a member of our team comes to us with a counter offer, we have failed, because we should be proactively making our team feel like they have their compensation in hand. They should be able to come to us and have a conversation about their comp without having another offer in their hand. If they're unhappy, move roles, absolutely. But if you need another offer as a force to make me change my mind, then something's gone awry.
No, that's really important. Yeah. Sorry, and you were going to say, and
I was going to say, I think it's that kind of approach to proactive compensation management and being able to make someone feel like they can trust their compensation is a kind of an honest adult to adult conversation that they can have with us at any point, is the reason why in my previous company, again, no negotiation, we would have people have an offer from us, a very small company, versus one example, we had a person have an offer at Amazon, right? Big multinational, very well known. And they took the offer with us for slightly less comp. I think it was about, $5,000, $6,000. So it's not massive. But the reason they cited was because they had higher trust and confidence that their compensation long term would grow and be in good hands because of how we handled it publicly. And I think those kinds of stories are such positive explanations of like when you start treating people like adults and allowing people to have a conversation with you about their comp, you don't need to be relying on counter offers, someone going home behind closed doors and interviewing this adversarial relationship. I think someone else mentioned.
And someone did say
degrade.
And I saw that comment too. And I think this relates back to like the example I was given earlier, like where I've worked in companies where it's taken the CEO or someone like that to go in and be able to have those conversations in a way that feels really transparent and trusted and explainable. And it shouldn't be on the CEO to be able to do that. And I think the conversation needs to shift from winning a negotiation towards sort of making pay decisions that are trusted, transparent, explainable, that anybody can ask about at any point and get a really straightforward and defensible answer to. And I have worked in companies. I remember a couple of years ago working in a company where a colleague, where someone from another team came to me and sort of said, oh, we just run the pay reviews that first time. I just sort of observed them. And they came and sort of said, well, I spoke with my colleague who's in the same team as me, and I asked them how much they were paid, and they're being paid sort of like 10K more than I am, yet we're the same level and we're doing the same job. And we live in the same location, right? We both live in sort of proximity of the UK of England. I can only put it down to gender. He's been paid more than I am because he's a man and I'm a woman.
Yeah, of course.
We saw the breakdown in trust. That was the moment. That was it articulated because she didn't have that transparency around how the decision was made. She came up with her own narrative, and that was the breakdown. And so can you imagine the conversation I was having to have after that in terms of, oh, no, honestly, it's not that.
Yeah, of course, you're on the back foot. Everyone's on the back foot.
On the back foot. And then everything I'm saying sounds really, really sort of quite poor and is not landing as a result of that.
Yeah.
So I think when you've got a system that's built on bands, philosophy, market data, the same conversation is survivable, whether you've had it once or whether you've had it 20 times.
Yeah.
Even with the person who's had the counter offer elsewhere, you can really defend that. And I wanted just to add something about fairness, because we've been speaking about the word fair. And I think sometimes when we say decisions that feel fair, I think we have to sort of unpack that a little bit and just explain a little bit that fairness doesn't mean that everyone earns the same, right? I guess that's not what we're sort of saying, that everybody is earning the same. But what we probably are saying, and I'd love your stance on this, Jess, is it probably means that everyone is being rewarded consistently. The rationale behind the decision is really transparent and clearly understood. And progression, because that's where it compounds further down the line, is something that people can really plan for and understand. I wondered how you interpret it.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's interesting. They're taking me back to my law school times. where I think there's two things that people expect, right? They want procedural fairness and substantive fairness when it comes to comp, right? Procedural fairness is, how is this decision made? What are the rules? What's the right to be like to negotiate or not negotiate? Is there an unbiased decision maker? Like what's the procedure by which compensation is decided? And the other thing they look for is substantive fairness, like the outcome. So that's where, okay, well, is this actually fair based on the outcome that I see? Am I actually paid differently to someone else? Like looking for the validity of the reason. Like, is this actually the market rate based on the what's in Ravio? Confirming, like, is this outcome actually fairly following the process that you've set? And that's actually the two main things people are looking for. When we think like people are smart. They know the difference of why an engineer is going to be paid differently than a marketing person. Yeah. And I think there's some comments here about like, reasonable expectations. And I think that's actually a really good point. The times where I've seen unreasonable expectations from people more than anything is when people are left with the only way to gather whether they're being treated procedurally and substantively fairly is by looking things up on Glassdoor, talking to their colleagues, and doing things in a kind of a way that you are not thinking about the same fairness. So if you're not using the same framework for a conversation, it's like a calibration. You're not able to reach the same outcome. I really like that point you raised about unfairness as well. We have so many questions to get to, so I'm gonna quickly go to the answer we just had for this poll, which is that most of us, 41%, are doing an annual review, or not really when things get raised to it, another 22. So quite a huge proportion of our listeners today are feeling the wedge of what I imagine is administrative burden, and it is tough. And that's two things I want to say, or three. I'm going to say three things. First one is there are some really great tools out there. Leapsome is one of them. Ravio is one of them. At Leapsome, one of the things I love is that we're able to do these like real-time vibe coded analysis on compensation gaps. We have our compensation structure set up in there through Ravio. And obviously Ravio has like constant evergreen market data coming to us. We can do analysis. We can look at different roles. We can look at ways that things are changing. And these things are incredible. Today, we're going to give you two little gifts, if you're listening, to help you out. One thing that I'm going to share with you right now is in the chat, a Leapsome compensation philosophy builder. This will take you through the full cycle of starting your own compensation philosophy, and the final outcome is a set of talking points to take to your exec team to start having the conversation about building your compensation philosophy. And the second thing we're going to launch as well is to support that work. Ravio has given us 5 benchmarks, which is fantastic. So if you want to start putting that compensation philosophy you build using our tech that we've just shared you into action and figuring out, like, are we paying market? Are we not? Should we be doing 75th? Should we be doing 50th? This is the place to go. Thank you so much, Ravio team and Natasha. I love that.
Absolutely. I'm glad it helps. I hope it helps. I hope, it's a game changer, and burn the spreadsheet.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that a couple of years ago I would have been like, please, like drooling. I'm like in this, like, please, give me. So I'm glad to have this to share with everyone. Let us get to questions. We have so many of them. We have so many questions, and I love them as always. Okay, we are going to start from the ones with the most upvotes, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. David, we've already kind of touched on this a little bit, but we talked a little bit about how does Leapsome approach a situation where a candidate has another offer on the table from a comparable company for slightly more money? We do not negotiate based on counter offers at all. We discuss what people expect, and if a candidate makes a decision to take another offer for slightly more later on in the process, first of all, we do ask questions very early on. Are you in other processes? Would there be any reason why this, like, what your expectations maybe might change? We explain to them how our philosophy works. We explain to them that we have an open annual evergreen promotion and merit cycle that anyone can be have their salary changed at any point based on their manager recommendation, to give them strong trust that even if they may be able to earn a small amount of money comparably at another company, that actually Leapsome is the place to go because their compensation is in good and trusted hands. So that is why we do.
Yeah. I think that's such an interesting one as well, isn't it? Because I have another offer that's higher, it kind of sparks this emergency, like, oh my God, I've got to fix this now. It's like we go into sort of like hyper mode. And the honest, I think like a defensible answer as well is something like, well, really appreciate you telling me, and I want to be transparent about how we got to this particular number, how we got to this offer, and explaining how that offer sits within the bands, where it sits within the bands, based on the level, the market, whatever variable you're putting into your comp decision, and how their experience as you've assessed it places them within that band. Now, if there is something that we haven't fully accounted for, in their experience, their background, that maybe we haven't accounted for, then let's have a conversation around that. But no, we're not going to move the number just because another offer was higher elsewhere. But sometimes it could be a case of, have we assessed this person correctly? And maybe actually we need to go back to our leveling. And so when we go back to our leveling, we can say, did we scope them in the right band? And actually, should have they been at a higher level band, or are we quite, are we sort of firm on where we are? And that's why having sort of, really strong pay philosophy and decision making is key for these conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of the things you just touched on then, and I'm like, again, like trying to answer some of these questions for these blessed angels that have joined us today, is there's all these little bits and pieces that happen post recruitment. Right. Recruitment, I think we've touched on like quite a lot, but there's like all these bits that happen when someone's already in the team now, and we want to, maybe someone has, how freely can this person move within that band? If someone's at the beginning of the band or the later part of the band, like there's all these questions, right? And some of the little tips that I want to give about what this does, in my opinion, is a good example here is if someone, first of all, it removes that exposure therapy thing we spoke about before, right? Managers now have visibility, just like candidates, into the full band, their team salaries, how everything works together. And if we have a candidate coming into the recruitment process that either is asking for less than another member of our team, we will just raise them so that they're paid the same. We make sure that there's equity as a default. And same thing within our own team. If we have a candidate coming through that maybe someone in our team is paid less than, and that candidate's coming through very genuinely from the market, from the interviews we're having, from what's going on, we will raise the member of our team internally to make sure that new joiner and them don't have different salaries. There's this constant process that needs to go into this, like what you've mentioned already just recently here. You're constantly thinking about your whole, let's make sure we're moving and thinking and building that trust and making sure that fairness is constantly being adjusted. Is there anything else that you guys think about when it comes to bands and movements within bands that is helpful for Dean and the others that have asked similar questions?
Yeah, I think that whatever happens, pay equity is your first fix always. And I strongly believe, and what I've seen in practice and what I've done is I've started there all the time, because what would then happen is your hiring process, your compensation cycles will then all kind of be built on top of that. It starts with the pay equity. It starts with pay parity. And we've seen how these things compound. So what starts as a single individual negotiation, a higher offer, then what you have, it might start off at, say, I don't know, 5%. You're then rewarding somebody who we're not then fixing for that later on in the system. So what happens is you might have your compensation cycles where you have team members, the internal team members, moving up in this way, and then the other team member who's just joined recently then moves up this way. Or you might need to make a decision to then freeze the new hires pay in order to catch everybody else up. And so what happens is you get into this, and I'm sure everybody in this room has felt this in one way or another. You get into this sort of constant trying to fix, trying to tweak, when actually what you want to be able to do is reset each time. Compensation actually isn't a one-time only conversation or action. It's not just left for compensation adjustments. We have to be reviewing this more regularly. And something that we've not spoken about, which we probably should, is now let me get the wording right, the EU Pay Transparency Directive, which came into play in June. Now, just in case you haven't heard of this, and I'm pretty sure everybody has, because if you haven't, I'm kind of like, okay. Obviously, that's focused mainly on bigger companies at the moment, but actually, I think it's a gold standard to have in place, because what the EU PTD is saying to everybody is, What we want is this constant realignment, this constant readjustment of equal pay, and not just between, and you can use gender, men and women for it, but actually other forms of marginalized groups within your organization, your company, will benefit from this. But I would see this as a gold standard, not just a compliance exercise, but constantly updating your pay mechanisms, so that equity stays very much at the foundational level, stays very much at the cornerstone of all of that. And then having documentation, justifiable reasons for when you make exceptions. And I think that's going to be key. And I think that's a standard practice that we should really start thinking about as well. For irrespective of size.
I think this is a really good point. Like, it doesn't, I mean, we have so many questions. I can't wait to answer them, but
I
feel like we're not going to be able to get through them all. I think I'm trying, but I think there's it doesn't matter if you're not in a company of the size that the pay transparency directives in wherever you are, whether that be the EU or there's, New York also has pay transparency directives in certain places too, or like laws in certain places, but it doesn't matter, because what I think is happening now is the social expectation is towards more transparency and a less parental adversarial relationship to compensation. And I think it says a lot about your culture as a company if you are not making these kinds of steps. And maybe that's fine. Maybe you want to be a company where that says something about your culture, but everything that you choose to do as a HR leader makes some kind of statement. So I would encourage you to think about whether this is the statement you would like to make. That's all. Okay, let's go have some more questions. We've got we have a great question, a few questions on budget. I'm not going to dive into budget today, but what I'd love to do in the chat, if you're here, is let us know if you would like to see the next session on calibration, which we mentioned at the beginning of this because I'm in the calibration week, or maybe you'd like to see it on budgeting and workforce planning and how to think a little bit more about those things at the beginning of the year so that you have the kind of leverage to make these changes ad hoc. Would love to let you know what you think in the chat, and we'll take this on board. Share it with my marketing team are out there like, Jessie, stop offering things we're not ready to do. I'm doing it.
I'm like thinking about myself as well. And also one of the things to say that a lot of these discussions, so we have at Ravio quite a lot of community discussions around things like pay transparency. For example, there was a question earlier in the chat. Somebody was asking, well, how do you deal with a CEO or a leader in the organization? Want to be transparent about these things. And so there are a lot of discussions around this, and that's a very real point as well. And I want to draw that out, that sometimes that is the culture. And sometimes that is what the culture shows. And don't forget, compensation is a signal of culture, isn't it?
It is. It's the biggest one. It's the reason we come to work. And I think that's such an important thing to say. It's the reason we're here.
And sometimes the culture just isn't transparent. And that's the culture too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, this is like such a good point. It's like ultimately comp is the thing that, I talk about my people as a product methodology. The product I am buying at the very, very core of it is I'm trading my labor for money. We all are, and that's okay. And there's all this gorgeous actual product that exists around it, like the benefits, the compensation, the purpose, the office, all these things. But if you're not paying me, I'm not coming. And if that pay isn't fair and it's not clear and it's not transparent and I don't understand it, that's a really big problem. Natasha, I've loved this. Thank you so much. You were such a...
I've loved it. I could have carried on. I just looked at my watch and went, oh my gosh, is that the time already?
Yeah, I know. We said this on the prep. We were like, it's an hour, but it's going to go by in a flash.
It's going to go like this.
I know. We have both of the LinkedIns in the chat for me and for Natasha, which means that if you unfortunately asked one of them, I think we had like 50 questions come through, and I wish I could answer all of them.
So sorry.
Please message us, DM us. We'd love to have it. We would love to hear from you. I'm an open door, and I know you are too, Natasha.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really appreciate meeting with you today. Enjoy your dinner with the Unleashed team later on this week.
Yes, I'm going to be meeting those girls. Is it next week? So some of the girls are going to be getting together. So and I'm going to give them your love, and
love that. Enjoy the nice sunny day that you're having over there in the UK, and I will chat to you very, very soon, I'm sure. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I always love these webinars. I get so much energy from them, and I'll speak to you all very soon.